Hi, welcome to Prime Recap. A mother comes across her son trapped in a fully armored and indestructible car and will now do everything to get him out of that nightmare. Today we will recap the story of the 2016 movie, Monolith. Monolith is the safest car ever designed on the planet. The vehicle features adamantine nanotechnology armor, ultra-thin and bulletproof windows, 25 different state-of-the-art anti-hazard sensors, and a totally unique vault mode that keeps passengers safe from harm. Since cars are very susceptible to theft, Monolith was designed with the priority of keeping drivers completely safe from any external risk. The vehicle has an artificial intelligence named Lilith, who plays the role of driving companion and safety manager. Sandra is one of the first lucky ones to experience this car that, for the time being, still has few units available in the market. The woman takes a short trip with her son, on her way to the home of the boy's grandparents. As soon as the artificial intelligence is activated, Lilith appears to introduce herself to her new users. Through the weight of the passenger in the back seat, the system can detect that this is a child, and Sandra is surprised to discover this feature. The woman asks Lilith to calculate her weight, and then asks about the weight of the other people who have been inside that vehicle. According to the data provided by the system, the woman discovers that in addition to her husband, his friend, and the friend's girlfriend, a fourth person got into that car. By the weight, this person was probably a woman and Sandra has no idea who it is. This is enough to make her suspicious. A few minutes later Sandra calls her husband, Carl. The man answers and she asks how his trip to Los Angeles went. Half an hour ago, Sandra had tried to talk to Carl, but his phone was off. He says his cell phone was out of battery, but his wife doesn't buy the idea. To further increase her suspicions, her husband suddenly says he has to hang up because his crew was waiting for him in the recording studio. Carl is a successful music producer and gifted Monolith to his wife as a way to compensate her for being away from home all the time and never having time for family. During the trip, Sandra stops at a roadside convenience store to change David's diaper. In the bathroom, she listens to some girls talking about the crazy things that happened last weekend and feels nostalgic. Before David was born, Sandra was a famous singer, but she quit her band to build a family with Carl. When they leave the bathroom, the woman decides to buy some gifts for her son and the boy chooses a bear costume. While paying for her groceries at the checkout, she sees a strange guy approaching her car and, through a cell phone app, triggers the security system to scare him off. Then another guy, named Ted, shows up and says that one of his friends recognized Sandra while she was in the bathroom. The man asks if she was the lead singer of the band Hipstars and Sandra is embarrassed, but at the same time happy that her work has been recognized. Then Ted invites her to a party that would take place that night, but the woman says she is passing through town, along with her son, and the man leaves. Sandra starts to look for David and realizes that the boy has disappeared. She looks for the boy in every corner of the store and then goes to check if the boy is outside. The woman calls for the child desperately, when she realizes that the boy is inside a yellow convertible surrounded by the women she met in the bathroom. When she finally manages to get her son back, Sandra starts arguing with those girls. After all, they heard her screaming for the boy and said absolutely nothing. As the woman puts David into the car, Ted shows up and the girls tell him what happened. The man tries to talk to her, but Sandra gets in the car and activates full security mode, making it impossible for anyone to get near her. Back on the road, the former singer is still in the nostalgic mood and decides to put the songs of her old band to play. She recalls that the Hipstars used to rank 4th in the top 100 most played songs and her band was present on all the major radio stations. This is how she met Carl. At that time, he was married to another woman, but had separated to be with Sandra. A few songs go by and she decides to call Jessa, one of the members of her old band. The woman, who was now pursuing a solo career, says that Carl was helping her record her songs. Just then, Sandra discovers that her friend has a visitor in her room and decides to hang up before David sees anything inappropriate. A few miles later, she arrives at her parents' house, but before she gets out of the car, she calls Jessa again and asks how much she weighs. Her friend is embarrassed by the question and Sandra decides to be more direct. She questions the identity of the person who is with Jessa in the room and the conversation becomes increasingly uncomfortable. Sandra is convinced that her former band partner is sleeping with her husband and they have a heated argument. Finally, Jessa says she needs to hang up and claims that she is not the one sleeping with Carl. Upon hearing this, Sandra's suspicions are confirmed and she discovers that she was, in fact, being cheated on, regardless of who it was with. The woman immediately calls her husband, but he doesn't answer. Sandra then decides to take a new route and go to Los Angeles to find him. Along the way, she keeps trying to talk to Carl, but the man does not answer the phone. On the way to Los Angeles, Lilith informs her that there is an accident on the road, which could delay the trip. However, Sandra wants to arrive as soon as possible at her destination and asks her driving companion to calculate a faster route. To speed up the trip, the woman takes a dirt road in the middle of the forest. It is already getting dark and Sandra has a long way to go of 80 kilometers to get back to the highway. Lilith offers to drive the vehicle so Sandra can rest, but the woman is sure she can make the entire trip by herself and decides not to give up the wheel. A few kilometers ahead, she finds an isolated place in the middle of the forest and intends to stop to eat, but soon realizes that it is an abandoned building and decides to continue on her way. As it was already dark and there were many rocks and other obstacles on the road, the journey was taking longer than Sandra could imagine. With each minute she becomes more anxious and takes out a cigarette in an attempt to calm down a bit. Meanwhile, David uses his cell phone to play games and distract himself during the long trip. Within moments, Lilith detects cigarette smoke and sounds a fire alarm. The windows open and the artificial intelligence asks all passengers to exit the vehicle for their safety. In order to turn off the alarm, Sandra deactivates Lilith, disabling all of her resources. Minutes later, while talking to David, the woman gets distracted and ends up running over a deer that was crossing the forest. Startled, she gets out of the car and goes to check what has happened. Seeing the dead animal right in front of her, Sandra becomes desperate and, while trying to think of a solution for the situation, David accesses the Monolith application and accidentally activates the vault mode. At this point, Sandra uses a piece of wood to try to prevent one of the windows from being locked, but is unsuccessful. The branch is broken in half and she almost loses some fingers. Almost out of breath, the woman runs to the window next to David's seat and directs the child to put his finger on the screen and drag to the right side. However, even with his mother speaking and gesturing clearly, the boy cannot understand the directions and accidentally drops the cell phone. Since he was stuck in the seatbelt, he would not be able to get the device back. So Sandra starts screaming for help, but she is in the middle of nowhere and no one hears her. Her last attempt is to talk to Lilith and ask her to open the door. However, since the woman had disabled the system, her co-pilot could not hear her. At this point, she realizes that she will have to force the vehicle open, so she takes a rock and tries to break one of the windows. The assault system is activated and the alarm goes off. Sandra keeps trying to break the glass, but the stone ends up cracking and the car remains intact. Now her only alternative is to go out in search of help. After walking for a few minutes, she arrives at the abandoned building and, realizing that the place is empty, she jumps through the gates to break into the place. There she finds a telephone. The phone has a single button that, when pressed, activates an electronic voice. Upon hearing the automated message, Sandra's hopes are renewed until the attendant informs her that all company offices are closed for the next few days. Furious, the woman begins searching for equipment that might help her survive in that place. First she grabs a flashlight, and then a giant screwdriver that might be more successful in destroying the glass of the monolith. On the way back to the vehicle, Sandra hears a strange noise and runs to get in the car. Soon after, a rabid dog appears to attack her, but Sandra uses the tool to defend herself and drives the animal away. As soon as the dog leaves, she uses the tool to try to destroy the windshield, but her new attempt also becomes a failure. While she thinks of another possible solution, the woman tries to calm David, who is already desperate about the whole situation. After having a cigarette, the woman decides to rest in order to have energy to go after help the next day. She is hopeful that her husband will find them, but also believes in the possibility that Carl will not go looking for his family, as this would be a great way for him to get rid of both of them at the same time. The next morning, when she wakes up, Sandra goes to check on David. Although he is weak, hungry, and dehydrated, the boy manages to hang on for a few more hours. Since they are in the desert, the place is extremely hot, including the interior of the car. David cannot take off his bear costume, which could cause him severe hypothermia. In an attempt to ease the heat for her son, Sandra removes the shirt she was wearing over her blouse and uses it to cover the glass of the sunroof. Now she needs to get to the nearest airport and pray to find someone there to help her. Seeing his mother leaving, the boy begins to cry and Sandra tries to calm him down. However, nothing is able to make David stop crying. With no other alternative, Sandra decides to leave him and makes her way towards the airport. After much walking under that scorching sun, the woman is completely dehydrated. To her luck, just as she is about to reach her limit, she hears the sound of running water and finds a stream in the middle of the desert. After quenching her thirst and freshening up, the woman goes on with her mission to find the airport. Once there, she discovers that there is only one abandoned airplane. Sandra goes through all the compartments looking for a telephone. Since she can't find anything that could be useful for communicating, she decides to gather some tires and set them on fire to make a kind of smoke signal. Before leaving, she grabs a gallon, which she then uses to collect water from the creek before returning to her car. The way back is even more challenging. Besides being exhausted, Sandra has to carry a gallon of water that, although almost empty, is a great weight for a person in her condition. When she arrives at the vehicle, Sandra finds David passed out. The boy's face is completely red and dripping with sweat. She frantically knocks on the glass in an attempt to revive him and spills almost all the water she has collected on top of the vehicle in an attempt to cool it down. Still, the boy does not wake up and his eyes are already turning purple. Sandra remembers that when Lilith detected the smoke from her cigarette, the car windows opened with the fire alarm. So she picks up some dry leaves and uses her lighter to build a small fire in the front of the vehicle. However, this time the smoke was being detected from outside, which causes all ventilation systems to be shut down in order to avoid bringing the smoke into the car. Realizing that her plan has backfired, Sandra uses what's left of the water to put out the fire. At this point, the woman directs the rest of her energy to trying again to destroy the vehicle. She uses the tool to attack the car with all her might, but no damage is done. At least this indicates that the car is really safe for those inside. Exhausted, Sandra takes a nap and dreams of her husband. In the dream, Carl and she drive to the desert to visit David's grave. The woman gets down on her knees and begins to cry, so Carl tries to pull her back to the car, stating that going there was a big mistake. However, Sandra insists on staying there and tries to rid herself of the guilt for having caused the death of her own son. She recalls all the mistakes she made that led her and David into that terrifying situation. Perhaps if she hadn't given the boy her cell phone to keep him from bothering her on the trip, if she hadn't decided to go to Los Angeles, or else if Sandra simply hadn't smoked a cigarette and let Lilith drive the car, none of this would have happened. However, she tries to shift some of the blame onto Carl. After all, if the man wasn't cheating on her, Sandra wouldn't need to drive to Los Angeles. If she did not distrust her husband's loyalty, she would never have taken that road and driven there at night. However, Carl assures her that if there is one person to blame for the situation, it is Sandra. Despite believing this, the woman refuses to admit the truth and wakes up scared. When she looks out the car window again, she realizes that her son remains in exactly the same position as before. Seeing this, she believes it is already too late and begins to ask for forgiveness for causing the boy's death. Just then, the dog that attacked her earlier appears and Sandra is ready to accept her death. But everything changes when she sees David's little hands moving. Her hope is renewed and she is determined to keep fighting. After getting the tool, the woman hides under the vehicle and tries to evade the dog, but the animal attacks her leg viciously. Realizing that the dog wants to get the deer that was dead under the car, Sandra starts to push the animal's body closer to the dog and manages to get rid of the attack. Now that it no longer had anything preventing it from moving, the vehicle starts to roll towards the cliff and the woman tries to stop it. However, she does not have enough force to keep the car from moving. Luckily for her, a rock in the way that attaches itself to the wheel and keeps the vehicle stationary. Looking at the cliff, Sandra has an idea. She intends to throw the car over the cliff because, according to her safety manual, when she has an accident all the doors should open so that the passengers can get out. So she starts kicking the stone that was holding the wheel of the car, but she is so weak that she can't even move it out of place. To complete her plan, the woman must find a way to retrieve the tool that was on the ground next to the dog without being attacked by it. The best Sandra can do is start screaming to intimidate him. She screams with all the force of her lungs until the animal gets scared and walks away. After breaking the rock, the woman pushes the vehicle over the cliff. Her leg is badly injured from the bites she has taken, but she still finds the strength to finish the job. During the fall, the vehicle detects that it is falling and soon its rotation mechanism is activated so that it falls upright, with its wheels on the ground, as if it were a cat. Sandra then begins to descend the pile of rocks and, after suffering a few accidents along the way, manages to reach the car. Luckily for her, the doors were unlocked and she manages to rescue her son. Her first action is to remove the boy's clothes and put him in the shade so that his body can cool down a little. A few minutes later, she puts him back in the car and activates Lilith so that the system can help her find a way out of that place. The problem was that no matter how much it recalculated the route, it was impossible to find a way out of that place, other than to climb the mountains and return to the road. Then Sandra switches the vehicle to terrain mode and goes full speed up the mountain. With Lilith's help, she manages to dodge most of the rocks in her path, but ends up crashing into some of them. The vehicle is so powerful that it proved capable of breaking a couple of rocks that were in front of it without suffering any damage. A few minutes later, both were on a hospital gurney being taken to the emergency room. In this instant, Sandra's only concern is whether her son will be okay. The boy was completely pale, but after a few hours in the serum he wakes up and the woman cries with relief. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, please like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.